All of her lingerie is handmade. She hunts the kind of little out-of-the-way shops which delight most women. She discovered such a one on West 57th Street run by a French refugee and asked the woman over the phone to bring her collection to the Waldorf, and the woman refused. A customer hearing the conversation remarked, "I should think you'd find it a great honor to service the Duchess." "Madam," was the reply, "it is an honor that I cannot afford." I've run across a lot of modists and jewelers who say that they wouldn't take the Duchess's accounts on a bet that she never pays her bills. Some say that that is one reason she bought at so many shops on her last visit. She was staggering her orders because of the OPA freezing of accounts. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. We're reading Traitor King today. So if you have been with me this week, you know that we finished the Jada book. But in order to get that done, I used my Sunday slot, and this one got bumped again into the middle of the week. So I'm sorry, I just can't seem to manage myself. But here we go. We're covering a chapter called Beyond the Bahamas. And in this chapter, they're wanting to get away from the Bahamas. They've always been unhappy there. I mean, that's no surprise. They have spent the entire time that they're in the Bahamas looking for work somewhere else, and Churchill just has not been able to find a place that he thought would be suitable for them. And, there's a little thing called World War II going on, so nobody has the time or bandwidth to sort of solve all his problems. And quite frankly, I'm surprised they've given him the time of day as much as they have. This chapter at first I thought was going to be kind of boring because I thought it was just going to be them kicking around ideas for where Wallace and David could land. And it turned out to be a lot more interesting than I thought it would be, mostly because it talks about people's perception of Wallace and David, and this really negative article that came out about the two of them. They are forced to go back to the States. She's got serious health problems, which sort of begin to unfold in this chapter. But while they're there, this journalist decides to interview all of the shopkeepers and all the sort of the everyman who runs into David and Wallace. And the article is very unflattering about how they're coming across and the way they're using and manipulating people for their own ends. So David tries to get it shut down. He is super paranoid. He thinks that all media is against but specifically because of Wallace, they're against him. And, so he goes down the rabbit hole trying to protect her. It's all very familiar. It seems to be a family trait to try to make these grand claims that people are against your wife. And, this is this huge idea that the media is out to get your wife. I mean, where have we heard that before? Anyway, again, like I said, it's not a super long chapter, but it was much more interesting than I thought. Nobody gets murdered in this chapter, but still interesting. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to go watch that last episode because that was a crazy episode. I was not expecting that one. Okay, like I said, this is called Beyond the Bahamas. It's chapter 15. It starts out by saying the Windsors were not happy. Tell us something we don't know. The Duchess was exhausted from her war work and increasingly suffering stomach pains. The Duke was caught between the strictures of the Colonial Office and the Bay Street Boys. His allies, Leslie Heap and Eric Hallinan, had now moved on to other postings, and he felt exposed in his dealings with local politicians. Wallace wrote to her aunt and said, "I really feel that neither of us can stay in this place, either physically or mentally, for another year. I do not think that the Duke would hesitate to throw his hand in, for this is no place for him, and to think he's dumped here solely by family jealousy." It's not for family jealousy, it's because he abdicated the throne, so what are you going to do with the next king? There's not exactly a playbook for that. That month, Oliver Stanley, the colonial secretary, told Churchill that the Duke had asked to resign. The Duke was now looking beyond the war in the Bahamas and lobbying hard for a job as a roving ambassador in the United States or as a Canadian governor or general. At the palace, there were serious discussions about the Windsor problem. Now, the person who had been cast with the job of figuring something for the Duke and who sort of was working on the problem on the ground and then reporting to Churchill about what he thought was Tommy Lascelles, and you know him if you watch The Crown. He wrote, "As you know, I was once closely associated with the Prince of Wales, and since this association began nearly 25 years ago, I don't think any problems in my life have given me so much anxiety as those arising from his. wrote Tommy Lascelles to Churchill's private secretary. Lascelles outlined 4 possibilities that the Duke might potentially look forward to if he decides to resign from the Bahamas. He said that perhaps he could undertake ambassadorial or proconsular jobs abroad. Then there was the idea that perhaps he could live in England as a quasi-younger brother of the king. There was the other idea that maybe he could live in England as a private individual and devote his great wealth to some useful project in which he was interested. And then the last and final idea was that maybe he could do that same thing in America. Not one of the things on this list are like, oh, what a light bulb moment. That's something he could do. All of these ideas have been kicked around in one way or the other. But they all have their problems. Again, not surprisingly, we've heard all these before. With the first option, him undertaking an ambassadorial or proconsular job abroad, there was not in the British realm any official place for a next king. Even if there was an open job, it would be inappropriate for David. I mean, as we saw with him going to the Bahamas, that was kind of a huge issue because the job, Wallace said it many times, but there's truth to it. The job was a little small for who he was as a former king of England. So it made the family look a little petty to have put him there. And there's a lot of reasons why they did. It wasn't just out of family jealousy, as she says. It's because he was making friends with the Nazis. So where could they put him? Where could they exile him that perhaps he wouldn't have all these ties to the underbelly of the world? Anyway, there wasn't any job for him that would be appropriate as an ex-king. And how can a man who has denounced the British crown personally represent the sovereign, or even impersonally represent His Majesty's government? Tommy Lascelles argued that the Duke could not distinguish between the wood of the public weal apart from the trees of private inclination, and that he had a Rehoboam-like tendency to take up with undesirables and dangerous associates. The latter may have diminished, but from the episodes of the scoundrel Bedeau and the egregious Gren, it doesn't look like it. That reference, a Rehoboam-like tendency to take up with undesirables, man, I just love to read the writings of educated people. Anyway, the second and third options were just not possible. Any kind of option that involved him living in England was just unthinkable. He can't live as the quasi-younger brother of the king because he would constantly be trying to usurp the king's authority. And he certainly isn't going to live as a private individual in which he would have to pay taxes, God forbid it. So you could just take those off the list immediately because neither one of those things could ever actually come to fruition. If he had to pay £20,000 in taxes, I can tell you right now, he would have run for the hills. So that, I don't even know why they listed that as a possibility. Lascelles goes on to say, the prince, I understand, is one of the richest men in the world, without encumbrances of any kind. He could make himself a charming home, a thing he's never yet had, and he could make wonderful use of his money by furthering some of the many schemes that have successively caught his interest. Stettinius told me that he is at present absorbed in the dehydration of vegetables. That sounds a somewhat dreary hobby for a man's middle age, but it's just as useful and maybe as amusing as agriculture, stock raising, and so on. I mean, everybody's just trying to figure this weird little man out, He's interested in dehydrating vegetables right now, I guess. Maybe he could do that in some capacity. I can tell you right now, the Duke does not possess the ability to figure out how to run a company in which dehydrating vegetables was ever going to be profitable for him. If he couldn't make stock raising profitable, I'm not sure how dehydrating vegetables was going to really skyrocket him into realms unknown financially. Churchill's response was that someone acceptable both to the king and the Duke should be sent out to talk all this over with the latter in order to ascertain what he wishes and what he will or will not do. Gotta call Walter Monckton in. That poor guy has never been given a moment's rest this entire book. Every time there's a crisis, just at the boiling over point, gotta send Monckton in. That guy must have just hated his life so very much. So discussions continued to be carried out. The king suggested that perhaps a South American ambassadorship would be appropriate. I can't think of anything further from appropriate, because we already at this point had enough intelligence information about what was going on in South America to know that that would not be the place for David, who already had Nazi sympathies. It's not like after the war we discovered that all of the Nazis ran away to Argentina and that nobody could have mapped that course out. People knew that that was where they were stashing money in South America. People knew that they had sympathizers there and that there were places being prepared for them in the event of a quick escape. And so I'm wondering, like, who is briefing the king that he keeps hammering that one on? Well, let's just send him to South America. No, let's not send him to South America. Halifax, thank God, was less keen about that idea, preferring the Duke to settle as a private citizen in France or in the United States. There was talk of a governorship somewhere, but, that got stamped down. Finally, in a telegram to Churchill marked strictly private and personal, the king made the family views clear. In any discussion as to his future, perhaps you would put forward my conviction, which you already know, namely that his happiness will be best promoted by making his home in the USA. Repeat, the USA. His brother definitely does not want him home. He has said that many's the time. Meanwhile, Windsors are back in the United States, and they were staying with their friend Robert Young in Palm Beach. Now, Wallis had been admitted to the Roosevelt Hospital in New York for the removal of her appendix. But, as was revealed under surgery, she had a far worse situation than an appendix problem. She had stomach cancer. And that's why she was having so much stomach pain. Weirdly, the book doesn't go on very much about this horrific discovery, stomach cancer, especially at this time to hear the C word, cancer, horrifying. But she's going to undergo some treatment for it. But that is the backdrop to a bunch of drama that's about to unfold in their lives. And you can imagine that if you were trying to deal with your stomach cancer, some of this other stuff would just be so odious that you would feel, what had your life come to? That here you have stomach cancer, and then the petty drama, the petty drama that is just raining down on your head would be more than you could handle. So what was this drama? Well, in New York, the Duke called in the FBI to reveal that he'd been blackmailed by a former girlfriend, Rhoda Tanner Doubleday. Now, this lady is insane. And we're going to detail quite explicitly her habit of getting involved with men and then being a complete leech on their financial situation. Now, I'm not saying that the guys that she got involved with were, pure as the driven snow by any means. Obviously, she was involved with the Duke, so she got really poor taste. But her MO is to date men, break up with them, and then sue them for some unimaginable reason. As was revealed by the FBI, who wrote a report on this woman, he ran around with Rhoda Tanner Doubleday quite a bit over a period of 5 or 6 years. And she had been a nuisance for some time, writing to him after his marriage, claiming he should have married her. And, he'd put the matter in the hands of his lawyers and just wanted them to clean it up and take care of her and just make her shut up. She'd been writing to him since 1941 saying, "Why didn't you marry me?" And in 1943, she sent him a packet of some jewelry. And it was from her with a note saying that the least he could do was to purchase her jewelry. And this, too, he handed right over to his lawyers, like, "I don't know what any of this is about. Just take care of it." I don't know, was this jewelry that he had given her over the course of their affair together? Had she fallen on hard financial times and her thing was, you didn't marry me, you left me high and dry, the least you could do is buy this jewelry back? I don't know. I mean, I've never in all my born days heard of somebody breaking up with somebody and then being like, "You should buy the jewelry back that you gave me." What? All right. Anyway, Tanner was the same age as the Duke and had come out as a debutante in 1913. 2 years later, she'd married Felix Doubleday, part of the publishing family, but they divorced in 1924, and she later sued him for $10,000 in back alimony. From 1924 to 1932, she moved in the same circles as the Prince of Wales, and they probably had an affair during that period. Returning to the United States, she began a relationship with the businessman Harold McCormick, successfully suing him for $65,000 for breach of promise when he didn't marry her. That is a different day. I did not know that at any point in time you could sue a man for not marrying you when you thought he was supposed to. The following year, the FBI noted that she had an abortion and threatened to file rape charges against the thoroughbred racehorse owner Louis Rowan, the 21-year-old son of the Italian princess Orsini. Can we just pause real quick to say, isn't it weird that the FBI had such a extensive file on this person? I mean, she sounds like a nut running around dating men and then suing them for various causes. But to have an FBI file on them, was she just running with the rich and famous to such an extent that they thought it would be notable to have her goings on reported? I mean, is there an FBI file on all of us, or just the most important people, or the friends of the most important people? I don't know. Anyway, so she's sued her ex-husband. She sued the guy who's supposed to marry her. She's threatening to file charges against this thoroughbred racehorse owner, and she's had an abortion, saying that she had to, she's trying to move on from the rape and all of this. A heavy drinker by this point, and mentally unstable. By August 1944, her life had collapsed to such an extent that she was working as a sales lady at the Gunther Fur Shop on Fifth Avenue. The FBI agent Jerome Doyle saw the Duke at the Waldorf Towers on August 29th and presented him with the file, and he said the Duke was very, very impressed with the information obtained. As a matter of fact, the Duke almost fell out of his chair 3 times when he realized that he had almost become mixed up with her. He wanted to be sure, you understand, how much he appreciated the information. The Duke heard no more from Mrs. Doubleday, and the matter was hushed up. But it was yet one more bit of evidence to the authorities of the embarrassment of his private life. And then it's just difficult when you see this guy, gleefully sitting on the stool at the bar, reading over the FBI file, beside himself with glee over the drama that has befallen this woman and the fact that he didn't get involved with it. This same individual is coming to you as the King of England saying, "So you guys got any work for me?" He's just such a joke. He's such a fool, and he was a fool even without getting wrapped up with Miss Rhoda Tanner Doubleday. But the fact that he would have such poor judgment that he found himself in her circle at all at any point, and did for 5 to 6 years, is astounding. They were running around together for 5 to 6 years before she finally decided that she was going to double-cross him and try to blackmail him. But how in the world could you have sustained a relationship for 6 years with somebody who seems completely off her rocker? Unless you too were off yours. But was this his only involvement with the FBI? Hardly. In June, the journalist Helen Worden had published a long and critical profile of the Duchess in the magazine American Mercury, based on interviews with a number of acquaintances and various retailers that Wallace frequented, suggesting that the Duchess was profligate, ambitious, she hoped the Duke would be Great Britain's ambassador to the United States, and the Duchess was just plain mean. The article said that, quote, at the end of her first New York visit as the Duchess of Windsor, she called in the detectives who had assigned to guard the royal suite which she and the Duke occupied at the Waldorf. "I have a little memento for you," she told them, and very seriously, she distributed 11 hotel postcards, each autographed by the Duke and herself. I don't care what anybody says. That is so ridiculous to hand somebody a picture of yourself that you autographed and you expect the other person to be grateful for it. The height of self-centeredness. And I know, I've mentioned this before, and people always in the comments say, well, you have to understand that that's the way the royals do. It's common for them to give their staff pictures that they've autographed of themselves. It's a memento for them. And in the event that they fall on hard times, they could sell it. It's almost like cash. Well, it isn't, and enough already of this. I don't care what echelon that you inhabit. You can never hand anybody a picture of yourself that you've autographed and expect the underlings to be grateful for it. Who do you think you are? The article goes on to say that perhaps she looked at autographed pictures as some kind of huge gift because she herself had a collection of autographed photos of those that she loved and admired, one of which was a picture of Ribbentrop that hung over her dressing table in Nassau. And there was an acquaintance of hers who reported such. In the article, Worden had said of Wallace that an autographed photograph of von Ribbentrop once hung over her toilet table in Nassau, according to a friend who visited her last winter. And when this friend commented on the picture, the Duchess said that she had known and liked von Ribbentrop before the war. Now, how do you think the Duke responded to this article that had come out about his dear, dear, dear wife? And, I mean, I should say, compounding the fact that it was critical of his wife, which he never appreciated anybody being critical, she does have stomach cancer. So he's probably beside himself with fear and anxiety as it is. And it does not help to have somebody writing words about your wife and you think that those statements are very unfair to her. So on a good day, he's touchy, but now she has stomach cancer. So I do want to be fair and say I would probably be pretty touchy too if I felt like everyone was criticizing my spouse and then he gets really sick and people won't ease up. Probably have some problems with that. Anyway, he demanded that a correction be made of what he claimed were criminally libelous statements. But Worden fought back, replying in the October issue of the Mercury, "My information about the von Ribbentrop photographs came from a friend of the Duke and Duchess who had been to their house. The Duchess was reported as saying that von Ribbentrop was her friend before the war, and she could see no reason why the fact of the war should make it necessary for her to remove the picture. My information came from a source in which I have complete confidence." But the Duke continued to be totally paranoid and contacted the FBI. When he could not get the magazine to retract the article, he just called the FBI. You know, they'd done some work for him before with this Doubleday girl, and now he's going to find out what they can do to silence this woman and maybe find out whether the entire media is against him. He asked them to investigate and find out if there was a vendetta against the Windsors in publishing circles, hinting that, as Worden was Jewish, that may have been the motivation. What's that got to do with anything? What's the inclination here? That because this person is Jewish, you couldn't trust what they did anyway? I mean, what is he saying? Well, he's Jewish, so maybe that's got something to... What does that got to do with anything? Explain yourself, David. The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, approached Jerome Doyle, a chief of the U.S. Special Intelligence Service, who undertook a discreet survey of SIS contacts in New York City to ascertain if there were any concerted efforts being made in literary circles in New York to injure the character of the Duchess of Windsor, but he found nothing to support the Duke's suspicions, including, by the way, on Worden's background, which raised questions not only about the couple's loyalties, but also about their judgment. As it would turn out, Worden is not Jewish. And so what exactly was the Duke trying to say in all of that to begin with? I mean, it was a big question mark what his point was anyway. But then as it turned out, it wasn't even true. Man, dude, you just suck. Anyway, the article also drew attention to the Duchess's extravagance, describing her expenditure on recent shopping trips. This blew my mind because I knew she spent a lot of money on trinkets and stupidity, but just the extravagance and the entitlement to this kind of lifestyle based on what just shocked me. She doesn't have any reason to spend this kind of money on clothes. She ordered 6 costumes from Valentina, 5 suits from Saks Fifth Avenue, and a dozen or more sports things from Hattie Carnegie. She bought between 20 and 30 hats, chiefly for Miss Jessica of Bergdorf Goodman, Walter Floral, and Braggart, the latest rave in men's milliners. Her purchases since she moved to Nassau have averaged 100 dresses a year. 100 new dresses a year? To what events is she wearing this? She lives on an island that doesn't even have a dry cleaners. Why are you ordering clothes? What are you wearing them to? You putting them on and going and walking in the sand? What is the point of any of this? You putting on all these dresses so you can go rock babies and cook bacon and eggs during the war effort? Like, what is the point of the clothes? I'm not saying you can't try to look nice. I do think we actually live in a day and age in which people could put a little more effort in. But on the whole, you could have a couple of nice outfits for the, 1 or 2 occasions a year when you actually get to do something fun. But for the majority of the time, there's nothing for you to be doing in the Bahamas where you need 100 new dresses a year and you need 5 costumes from Valentina and 5 suits from Saks Fifth Avenue, and you and your husband need a whole bevy of new hats. By the way, most of those dresses cost $250 a piece. And Mainbacher's black afternoon dresses were at that time $500 a piece, and she had several of those. The woman spent money like it was going out of style, but let me remind you, she actually had none to spend, so all of this is on credit. Worden continues in her article. She says, all of her lingerie is handmade. She hunts the kind of little out-of-the-way shops which delight most women. She discovered such a one on West 57th Street run by a French refugee and asked the woman over the phone to bring her collection to the Waldorf, and the woman refused. A customer hearing the conversation remarked, "I should think you'd find it a great honor to service the Duchess." "Madam," was the reply, "it is an honor that I cannot afford." I've run across a lot of modists and jewelers who say that they wouldn't take the Duchess's accounts on a bet that she never pays her bills. Some say that that is one reason she bought at so many shops on her last visit. She was staggering her orders because of the OPA freezing of accounts. This is humiliating. That you would be so known in New York City that when the Duchess would call you and say, "Could you bring your lingerie collection to my room? I would like to pick out some pieces." The little out-of-the-way shop owner knew to say no because she'd already heard she wouldn't get paid if she did. That's astounding and humiliating. And why in the world was the Duchess spending money like this, again, during a war when everybody else is pinching pennies and looking for ways to support the effort? I know she rocked some babies and made some bacon and eggs and did her piece when she was in the Bahamas. And I tried to give her what credit I could. I feel that I was lavish in my praise. But it's sort of offset by all of the spending when everybody else is trying so hard to live a life of reserve in order to support the war effort. Not her. In mid-September, the Duke, partly influenced by Wallis's health, met Churchill at Roosevelt's estate at Hyde Park and obtained permission to resign from the Bahamas, on condition that he did not return to Britain. The next day, Churchill reported to the king how the Duke hoped that he might perhaps be found some work in France at the head of some Anglo-French organization or other. But there were problems there. The French Foreign Affairs Minister wrote to Churchill that, in the view of some of the acquaintances that the Duke and Duchess have previously had in France, it would really be preferable that they should stay away till the situation has been cleared up. What Monsieur Massagli evidently had in mind, although he did not say so, was that he feared that the Duke and Duchess might seek to renew acquaintance with many who had turned out to be collaborators and that this would cause a most embarrassing situation. And it's just continued humiliation for the Duke, because as the Duchess recuperates in Hot Springs, Virginia, he's over there writing letters begging for work from someone. "Will somebody please give me work?" I don't really know why he wants work, because whenever he gets a job, he does it half-heartedly, and then he goes back to his playboy ways, goofing off, playing golf all the time, showing up to sort of look at what others are doing, and then goes back to wasting time. Why exactly does he want so desperately to even be given a job? He won't do it. And I suppose it's just for the respect, because then people can ask, he may very well not be doing anything, but he can at least, when people say, "Well, what are you doing these days?" he can say, "Well, I have this, that, and the other going on." Anyway, he writes again to Churchill and says, "If there was any sphere in which it were considered my experience could still be appropriately utilized." And he continues on saying, "I would not have thought that my presence in their midst," meaning his presence in Britain, "could any longer be considered so formidable a menace to the solidarity of the monarchy." He also pressed for a meeting with his brother, stressing that he was entitled to do so solely on the grounds of protocol as a former colonial governor. He goes on saying he just wants to see his brother. "I don't see why I can't." The thing is, the brother didn't ever really have problems with David. I mean, he definitely despised David and despised what he had done, but I think if it had not been for Wallis's involvement, they could have probably managed to patch things up. He writes, it could never be a very happy meeting, but on the other hand, it would be quite painless, and it would at least have the merit of silencing once and for all those malicious circles who delight in keeping open an 8-year wound that should have been healed officially, if not privately, ages ago. That's true enough. I mean, it could have been healed a long time ago, but you, David, continue to insist that your brother do something he simply cannot, and that is to meet with Wallis Simpson. If he meets with Wallis Simpson, then the big question will be, well, what took so long? And was there really a reason to have the king abdicate in the first place if you guys are all going to be fine with her now? That's exactly what King George felt. Tommy Lascelles, writing in his diary, had noted that Churchill had urged the royal family should bury the hatchet and receive the Duchess. But the king thought that such a gesture is wrong in principle and would imply that the abdication had been all a mistake. And I have no doubt that a number of people all over the empire might so interpret it and ask themselves, if the Duchess of Windsor goes to luncheon at Buckingham Palace, what was all the row about in 1936? And I completely can understand why they were reluctant to involve the Duchess now, even if their anger and angst had cooled a bit. For the sake of visuals, they cannot suddenly bring her in. Then it's saying, hey, British people, we know we asked you to, ride or die with our drama here, but it's all fine now. It's a little bit of a slap in their faces. Tommy Lascelles conveyed the palace's response at the end of December. I do not think there is any point of difference between the attitude of the king and that of the two queens as to a meeting with the Duke of Windsor. All of them would be glad to see the Duke, but none of them wish to see the Duchess. The following day, John Martin minuted to Churchill a conversation with Lascelles. In it he said, he explained orally that he did not feel that he could write in writing that the king was unwilling to see the Duke, but in fact his Majesty would not be sorry if his brother did not come to England for the next 10 years. The chief objection, however, is of course to meeting the Duchess. There's no doubt that the king's preference would be that the Duke should settle in America, or failing that in France, but that at any rate he should not bring the Duchess to England. They told the Windsors this. You cannot come. There's no place for you. We will not make a place, and frankly, you wouldn't be able to find one. So that's that. And it took the Duke 6 weeks to respond. Meanwhile, their personal life continues to fall apart. The Duchess is recuperating from her stomach cancer surgery. They've got the FBI situation with Doubleday and her pressure to expose the Duke. Then they've got the problems with the article that came out and, really threw the Duchess under the bus for spending like she did. And now their dear friends, George and Rosa Wood, who had accompanied the Windsors on their flight from the south of France in June 1940 to the Bahamas, now wished to leave the islands. And the way the Duke and Duchess saw it, this was a major betrayal. Like, how dare you leave us to suffer here alone? You've only been here every step of the way with us thus far for no discernible reason, but you should stay in our misery. And if you are going to try to crawl out of this place and go find yourself some kind of new life, well, forget about you. We didn't like you anyway. You can't come to my birthday party. Rosa told a friend, our goodbye, unfortunately, was a very unpleasant one. She said the moment the Windsors knew that we were leaving, they both suddenly became very nasty and made out that we were letting them down and only used them while it suited us. Almost funny, though, when George worked for the Duke for 4 years without 1 penny of pay. And I certainly did all to help Wallace. It's a very unpleasant ending and undeserved. It has somehow left us with a bitter and disillusioned feeling. It somehow left you with a bitter and disillusioned feeling. I'd say it was a completely disillusioned feeling to think that you had put down 4 years of your life to support these people for not 1 penny of pay, and you're over there burning the midnight oil trying to help Wallace. And then when you say, you know what, I think we're going to move on to greener pastures, other opportunities have arisen, the Duke and Duchess fly into a rage and say, this is a betrayal, how could you do this, and you only used us when it suited you. Well, I'm not sure exactly what they got out of living in the Bahamas, slaving for the Duke and Duchess for not a penny of pay. It doesn't really seem like the Bahamas were the place to be at this time. I know people go on vacation there now, but I don't really know exactly what was there in the 1940s. And to hear Wallace tell the tale, it was all but deserted except for a couple of houses, of which did not even have laundries in them. So I don't know. I really don't know anything about the makeup of those islands. And so it could just be that the Woods were ready to return to a more traditional mode of life. On March 15, 1945, the Duke resigned as governor of the Bahamas, several months before his term was officially up, but neither he nor Wallace could face another humid summer. It was dubbed the Second Abdication. Reviewing his tenure 2 days later, the Nassau Tribune wrote, "We know of many views held by His Royal Highness in which we are in strong disagreement, but we have grown to respect him because he's no politician. He doesn't bluff and he's no hypocrite. We were sorry to see the Duke come to the colony as its governor, but we're more sorry to see him leave." What a weird going away passage. The Duke's record was mixed. Much of his time in his final months had been spent dealing with the commission into the behavior of unpopular police commissioner Colonel Lancaster and poor morale, pay, and working conditions in the police. He had introduced various programs that had brought employment, but he'd failed to introduce income tax, though London had supported such a measure, and there'd been little political, economic, or social reform. His own views on self-government and race are clear in a report that he sent to Churchill in November 1942. Y'all brace yourselves. This is some ugly talk. It's an embarrassment that somebody in his position could speak like this about other people. And he clearly had no sense of care or concern for how other people would view the words that were coming out of his mouth. He says, those with experience of regions where the population is predominantly colored realize that Negroes en masse are still children, both mentally and morally, and that while these liberal socialistic ideas of freedom and equality, regardless of race or color, may sound fine theoretically, the forcing of these theories are, to my way of thinking, both premature and dangerous as far as the Western Hemisphere is concerned. I think it's appalling that that quote has not been used more to discredit him throughout history. To say that people of color are children both mentally and morally, and that it all sounds good to say they could govern themselves, but we all know they can't, is shocking. And I am not one to just call somebody a racist. I'm not one to just use inflammatory language for no reason. But the fact that he would think that and be fine with that going on record as his position, yeah, he really did find himself a cozy home with the Nazis, didn't he? Those people would have shared his views implicitly. Anyway, he may have just been abhorrent in his thoughts about the people that he was asked to govern. Wallace, her record was considered better. She had worked on improving conditions, whether the need for birth control clinics for civilians or canteens for soldiers were needed. She worked to find solutions for those problems, but there had been no official recognition in any honors list of the work that she had done. Should it ever be considered that there was any sphere in which my experience could still be appropriately utilized, my services will be available, the Duke wrote to Churchill. But the offers were not forthcoming, and the couple faced an uncertain future. Their past would now catch up with them, with the discovery in the Harz Mountains. Ooh, and that next chapter, you guys, is rich. I'm sure that most of you remember that a whole set of documents were found in the mountains in Germany right at the end of the war, and that a treasure trove of documents that had not been destroyed were discovered. In fact, this book over here, Operation Paperclip, is the first book that I read about that exposed all the information that had been in that trove of documents, and it really implicated a lot of people in very negative ways, and the Duke is one of them. Anyway, that is the end of that chapter. Like I said, not a super long chapter, but it's interesting to see the way that the Duke and Duchess were being perceived, and just they have very purposeless life now. I mean, at least before they could act like they were doing some cause for the empire, but now what, they have nothing. The empire does not want to utilize them in any way. Wallace is sick with cancer. They're being exposed as wasteful and just uncharitable people. And so where will they land? I'm as curious as the next person, because I have never followed their story super closely at this point. And so I'm interested to see, like, I don't have any idea what's going to happen to them next. Anyways, good to see you. You guys, we're starting Britney Spears' memoir. I am eating it up. And we should be able to finish that book this month in December, because it's not a super long memoir, and it's like, it's a really quick read. So I'm excited about getting that to you. And predominantly, I'm excited about reading that to you because Britney Spears, as I've said before, doesn't care about impressing you. So she's going to tell you the truth. She doesn't need you to like her. She doesn't need to make you feel any special way about her. She's going to tell you what happened. If she acted wild and she acted crazy and she made poor decisions, she says that. You know, she's gonna be super honest about the people in her life who made things difficult for her, but she's really gracious about it too at the same time, but not in a phony, hokey way. You know, she's just such a great storyteller thus far. And I have to say, this is the first memoir I read on this channel in which the author didn't need your approval, and that changes the quality of the writing completely. So I'm looking forward to delivering that to you later this week and really getting into a story that I think that for once we can just enjoy without having to be like, is this really true? It's gonna be a good one. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.